Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Paul Nauta, who is the Senior Marketing and Communications Manager for FamilySearch.org. So thanks, Paul. Thanks for being here.
Hey, I am happy to be here any day to talk Italian. I am game.
That's great. That's great. And so you're out in Utah, yes?
I am a transplant to Utah. Yes, my family hails from New York and Louisiana, which are common settling beds, I suppose, for Italian immigration in the U.S. But Utah has been my home for over 30 years now.
Oh, so that's a long time. That's quite a long time. I think my only time in Utah was standing on the Four Corners.
Well, that's not a complete representation of the state. You need to make it north a little bit. Maybe you can come next year for Roots Tech if we hold Roots Tech on the ground.
To start off, I'd like to talk about your family research and, when and why and how did you get started?
My fascination with my family history started when I was actually a really young child. I had one of those really large, ornate family Bibles that sat on our sofa table. So that stood between us and the TV. And I don't know how common that is, quite frankly, among Italians, but I'm going to guess that there are quite a few older Italians that may remember those here in the U.S. But in that book one day, it was sitting there on this wooden stand, and I was flipping through it, and there was this family tree in the middle of it, right? Very ornate page, and my father had begun to scribble in our family history. And that was the first time as a young child that I had, I guess, thought about myself or saw myself in the context of a family tree. And of course, all the names in it were Italian, Benvenga and DiNauta and Todaro and Pizzillo, which names that, I'd been around all my life up to that point, a few years. So that kind of planted a seed in my mind that I was part of this larger Italian diaspora family tree. And I think from that point on, as people were visiting us as they normally would through the course of the holidays or family events, I began to pay a little more attention to last names, the surnames, and I could kind of place them back to the book. So that was the earliest start in my family history. And then as I got into my teenage years, um, I realized that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints had a lot of microfilms and discovered that they had films for Italy. And that took me to the next phase.
Well, that's really neat. I was we didn't have the Bible, but we had the photo album, the black pages with the little corners, and we slid the pictures in, and we always had a card from my great grandfather, Niccolo Piramalo, and he was the card said from the Dukes of Capricata, and and so I was always fascinated with that card, and was my dad's grandfather, but I always looked at the book with my mom, and she always said that my great grandfather was a duke or a count or something like that, and so yeah, I was always fascinated by that, and that kind of left my mind, got married, raised a family, did all of that. And then probably, I guess, about 13, 14 years ago, I pulled out the card and I said, well, this is probably the starting point, for dad's family. And I found out a lot of just amazing things, not only from his family, but more from my great grandmother. And she's Cracciolo, and I've traced that family back to 950 AD. So to that point, though, I find it fascinating that your family comes from New York and New Orleans. So how'd that happen?
Yeah, so my dad is actually from New York. My dad's father immigrated. So my paternal grandfather immigrated from Italy, and he settled in Staten Island, New York. And my dad's mother's family, excuse me, is from Naples, the Naples area. So Sassano is one of the towns that they're from, Salerno. And I never really got to know my dad's parents, my paternal grandparents. They all passed away when I was very young, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. I have some very vague memories of one of my visits to New York when I was a young child. So everything I knew about that side of the family was through family stories. Like you, there we had those photo albums as well with stories, and Dad also had some postcards from the old country, um, where he had visited during when he was in the Korean War. He did a stint in Germany, and he did a quick visit on a furlough to Italy. And he didn't speak Italian too well, or at least he thought he did, but the dialect that they spoke in the town where his father came from was it was a foreign language to him, and he, quite frankly, was embarrassed by that, I think, and they their customs were a little foreign to him, and so he didn't talk much about it. And my paternal grandfather, my dad's father, discouraged him and his siblings from ever getting in touch with the family in Italy. And when asked why, he just said, "You know what? They're really, really poor. And every time you reach out to them, he says they're probably going to, ask for support and things along that line." So that was the line he gave with them. And they respected his opinion. And so we didn't ask a whole lot about that. On my mom's side of the family, my mom's family all immigrated mostly through New Orleans. My dad's into New York, and my mom and dad were pen pals when he was in the service. And so they got married. My dad moved to Louisiana. So I grew up under the influence of my maternal Italian grandparents. They lived next door um, and ran a mercantile down in Baton Rouge on North Street. So I was always surrounded by Italian communities and influence, but mostly from my Sicilian grandparents. And so how I began to make the connection, it was very, very fascinating. I began doing my family history research using the microfilm from FamilySearch through a local family history center. And I used a desktop genealogy program to organize that. Amazingly, FamilySearch has at the time, it was on microfilm, it had the civil registration of Italy starting in 1806. So I was able to do a lot of my genealogy using microfilm. And when FamilySearch put their tree online and Ancestry put their tree online, I uploaded my genealogy to both sites. And the aha for me was one day I got an email through the actual FamilySearch system from a Domenico DiNauta in Cagnano Varano, which is where my paternal grandfather Antonio is from. And I just got so excited. When you get something like that, having not spoken with anyone from the old country and been told by your grandfather, don't mess with it, don't reach out, I was just, beside myself with excitement. And so he says, you know what, he goes, I'm a student right now at the University of Bologna, but I'm from Cagnano Varano. He says, all the DiNautas are related. He says, I've seen your tree online. I have no idea exactly how we're related. He says, but when I go home for Christmas break, I'll share your genealogy with your permission with my grandpa. And let's see if we can figure out how my branch is related to your branch. And that was just so fascinating. And so, as promised, about a week after Christmas that year, he emailed me back and said, "Hey, my grandfather walked over to the town archive here in Cagnano, and the archivist is related to you, and he wants to talk to you personally." So I should have said out front, I speak Italian and can read Italian, so that's a blessing and a benefit. And this archivist gave me a call, and his name was also Antonio DiNauta, and he says, "Your great grandfather and my grandfather," he said, were siblings. He says, "So that's how you and I are related." He says, "And you've got first cousins still alive here in town, and they would love to meet you.
Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible.
So he gave me their names and phone numbers and told me how I was related to them. So basically, my my grandfather's parents had several children, and their uh, his brother Michael had lots of kids, and one of Michael's kids were still alive, so Vincenza, and then his he had a sister, and she actually only had one child, and he was still alive as well, Antonio. Matter of fact, both of them are still alive today. They're in their 90s. But I gave Vincenza a phone call, and it was like we never did not know each other. Immediately, the bond was set. We wept with joy. She was so excited to talk to me, and you would have never thought that we had never known each other prior to that phone call. And I think that's common with a lot of Italians that are trying to get back to the old country when they're able to make a connection. It doesn't matter what your immigration routes are, they accept you immediately. As a matter of fact, I jumped on a plane right away to go see them within a couple of months and got the rest of the story. But they didn't really want to look at the family tree after the first time. They just, your family. I didn't even have to prove to them how we were related. They just kind of took me on my honor that we were related. They knew my grandpa, and everything else wasn't important. Let's just celebrate as a family. But of course, I wanted to learn as much as I could and get all the history that I could. But that's kind of the blood love of the Italians, I think, in Italian families, at least from my experience. That's what it was. But I wanted to explain why my grandfather did what he did. When I told them the reason we hadn't got a hold of them, they already knew. They said, yeah, we know all about that. And I said, well, you may know all about that, but I don't know all about that. I said, why did he not want us to contact you? And he said, because your grandfather, this was Vincenza telling me this because her father was his brother. She says, your father went to the U.S. like everyone did to create a better life. And he says he was married here um, before he went to the United States. And while he was there trying to create a home for us here, his wife in Italy had an indiscretion with someone in the town. And, from a very small town, everybody knows everybody's business. And my grandfather was humiliated. And so he kind of swore that he was never going to go back. And in order to, uh, save his pride to that extent, he just discouraged any of us from communicating with the family in Italy. So when he died, the relationship died with him. But through doing my research and putting it online, I was able to make a living connection and restore those relationships with first cousins in Italy. So that's my dad's side. It's pretty amazing, and we are still very, very close. I've been back at least a dozen times over the years, and my kids are now keeping in touch with the cousins their age, and so the tradition continues.
Wow, that's fantastic. First cousins too. That's really amazing. From my dad's family, they're from Naples, but the the great great grandparents were from Calabria and Molise, various towns. But because of the noble roots, they were in Naples, I guess, because it was the Kingdom of Naples, and that's where all the action was. But with me, I had that card, Piramalo, and very, very uncommon name. It's only that one family has it. And when I started researching that, I found the family on uh, Libro di Oro, but I couldn't be 100% sure. And so then I found that Nicola Piramalo married an Amelia Caracciolo, and the names matched. My oldest aunt was Amelia. My father was Nicola. He was the second son. That all made sense. So I called my cousin who lived with my grandmother, and I said, "Do you know the name Caracciolo?" And she said, "Well, yeah, that's Nanny's mother." So I said, "Oh." I said, "I had no idea." Um, so then I went on Facebook and I started searching Piramalos and Caracciolo's and all of that. And with the Piramalo family, what I was able to piece together was I found fourth cousins. Some of the third cousins are still alive, but I was able to verify that that's the family that I came from. And that, to your point, that was just extremely, extremely exciting. Um, but one of the most interesting things about that family is, as far as I knew, my grandmother was the only Piramalo that had come to the U.S. And I could never understand why, because she came from a well-to-do family. And ancestry, for maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I got an email, and Linda said, "I think we're researching the same person. I wonder if we're related." And it was a Maria Piramalo, had come to the United States 10 years before my grandmother and grandfather. And I said, "Yeah, we're definitely related." I said, "Maria Piramalo is my great grandfather's sister." And so she was like, "Are you sure?" I said, I'm positive. There's no question about it. There's definitely. So, uh, but the most amazing part of the whole story is that her grandmother and grandfather, like I said, I had no idea that there was anybody else in this family, but her grandparents' names were Pitex. Her grandfather was from Sicily. And I always remember my father talking about they were going over to Pitex's house when I was 8, 9 years old or something like that. It turns out that the two families were so integrally connected throughout the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and 50s in the United States, and I had no clue. So now, have you gone to all the hometowns in Italy?
For the most part, I have. There's only a couple of lines that I'm struggling with. One of those is actually out of Hoboken, New Jersey. My grandpa Antonio DiNauta's wife was Teresa Benvenga, and um, that line right there is a tough one. Her father um, came from Naples, and her mother, for the longest time, the family was telling me her name was Rosie Bernard. But that didn't add up, because Rosie Bernard, they said, didn't speak English worth a lick. She was just could only speak Italian. I said, "Well, guys, that's not an Italian last name. Where's that coming from?" I said, "I don't know. It's what we always called her, Grandma Bernard, Grandma Rosie." So I was fortunately able to find their marriage record. Giovanni Benvenga and Rosie. She was actually a Garone, Garone, and her mother was a Bessolano. But those are two surnames in that area that are not common. You can find a couple of Garones, but I can't find any Besolanos. And on her wedding certificate, her dad had already passed away. He was noted as deceased. So I know she got married at a really young age, like the age of 13, to my grandfather, my great grandfather there in the area. But that's been a hard one for me. I've not been able to break that nut and move further back. I think I probably need to make a trip out when this virus clears and see if I can spend a day in the records there at the Mount Carmel Catholic Church in Hoboken and see if I can do some good there. But otherwise, I've been to Italy and I have visited everywhere they've come from. That's the only branch I didn't. On my mom's side, this is kind of interesting. They're Sicilian. They're all from a little town in Alia and thereabouts, which is in the mountains outside of Palermo, just in an hour from Cefalù. A lot of people will know Cefalù. I was having a hard time. We didn't have the records at the time. I was doing research on microfilm for Alia, and I was writing letters to the local priest in that church to see if he could help me out. Never got any response. Sent some money, still never heard a response from him. And I just felt this serendipitous draw that I needed to find these ancestors and link them to my family. And So some of your readers will respond to this. I began to just exercise some faith and pray. I'm one of these people that prays and applies faith to his genealogy. And I find that doors open. And I'll share with you two examples of that. But in this particular case, I just felt I should focus on my mother's side and was trying to I'd done all the research I could and couldn't get past the civil registration at that point, needed to get into the church records. Didn't do any good by reaching out to the church. So I just began praying and applying some faith to it with some urgency. And fascinating, one day at work, my neighbor calls me and he says, "Hey, Paul, I met this Italian fellow on the train into work today, and really nice guy. And told him I work with my neighbor was an Italian guy, and he was going over the family history library for something." He said, "And I gave him your name and number and told him when he's done in the library to give you a call. You would take him to lunch." And I said, "Well, Gordon, one, thank you. Two, every time you strike up a conversation with an Italian on the train in downtown Salt Lake, don't necessarily offer my resources for lunch with them." So we laughed about that. And sure enough, like clockwork, this Italian fellow calls me around lunchtime. And he was a little embarrassed and uncomfortable, awkward. He met this guy on the train and told him that, "Hey, give Paul a call and he'll take you to lunch." But I said, yeah. I mean, that's my neighbor. I said, "And what are you doing for lunch? Come on over. Let's meet for lunch." So here's the serendipitous things, right? So I'm sitting here talking with this guy. His name is Giovanni Criscione. He's from, he said he was from Sicily. So now my ears perked up, right? I said, "Really, Sicily? What part of Sicily?" I think he said he was from Ragusa, which wasn't where my family from. I said, "Well, I've got family from Palermo." I said, "My mother's side's from Palermo, and I can't make a connection there." And he says, "Well, have you written to the priest?" I said, "I have." He says, "I have been to that church where your relatives are probably a dozen times." He was a researcher from Italy. It's not something that he did professionally. He just loved to do it. His dad was the district attorney for Sicily, and so he traveled with his father and got to know all the priests and archivists throughout the area. This was kind of just his hobby. And he says, "I know the church. I know that priest." He says, "I'll tell you what, you book a flight to Palermo." And he says, "And I will meet you at the airport. And I will go with you to Alia and I'll introduce you to the priest." He says, "And let's spend a couple of days doing your research." So you tell me how that works, right? You begin studying your family line like that. You feel driven internally that that's something that you need to do. And so to me, the natural thing was to apply some faith, pray about it, and doors opened for me that way. And I've got a number of stories like that where that's the case. So, I went to Italy again that year, and Giovanni met me in Palermo. We drove over to Alia. He introduced me to Padre Di Sclafani. And this priest, he was wonderfully delightful. I didn't bring up the fact that I'd been writing him and sending him money. I was just grateful to be there. But he here's this church that has been here for just hundreds of years, and he took us to this little concrete walled archive, one room archive, cold as could be. It was in the winter, and says, "Here's the records that you want." They had two shelves or two bookcases there, and here were all these books going back to the 1500s, late 1400s. To put that in perspective, older than the Constitution of the United States and the Magna Carta, right? And it was right next to, on the other side of the wall from the altar of this really old church there. And it was such a unique, surreal experience. And he, he says, "I don't know you guys too well." The priest said this. He says, he says, and I don't have the time to sit here with you and go through the books. And I said, that's okay. I can read Italian. Giovanni had a master's degree in Latin handwriting, and of course was a very good researcher. And we said, just if you'll just let us research, we don't need your help. So he says, well, I'm going to have to lock you in here. He says, I'm busy. I got things to do. And it was one of these old medieval like dungeon doors, the big keys, and it was kind of the thought went through my mind is nobody knows I'm here except the people I'm renting a room from in town, and Giovanni. But he locks us in this room and clank, and you can hear the door lock. He says, "I'll be back around lunchtime. I can't bring you food or water because we don't want that in here." So like, okay, so he locked us in, and I was like a kid in a candy store. Again, all these old books, and we started with the most current and walked our way back. Giovanni told me how to set out cards and start capturing the families because we didn't know how many days he'd let us in there. But this went on for 2 or 3 days. We would come in the morning and he would let us in, lock us in, come back at noon. He actually brought us some water and lunch. He kind of softened up to us after a while, but he'd lock us back in. Evening time comes. He says, I'm going home. You guys got to go home. So he'd kick us out. But what a neat experience to just generation after generation after generation to see the history of your family unfold before your eyes in these old books that captured these key events in the lives of my ancestors. And as you're reading these christenings and baptisms and things like that, to realize that those all happened here right outside the door at the altar of the church, right on the other side of this wall. And sometimes I had to just stand up and just go look and walk to the altar when I was allowed to leave the archive, and just sit there and take it all in, and just walk around the town where they walked. And like you, I wrote down some of the streets that were mentioned, but they were all kind of the low rent areas. None of them really had a definitive address. It was always the lower street in this part of town type thing. So I walked around there and talk to the locals to figure out where it was, and just it changes you is all I can say when you walk where your ancestors have walked, and you can just feel the influence so much deeper to every fiber of your body when you're able to be where they've been, and you realize that you're standing on their shoulders. So you are in part who you are today because of who they were and the sacrifices they made, and I don't take that for granted. It changes me. It gives me something to live up to. And I want to pass that honor and privilege on to my descendants.
No, I understand it. And, interesting that you said, because I have a similar kind of thing that happened. But I did an interview with, she's a genealogist, but also a spiritualist. And when I was talking to her, I said, there's something, not everybody has it, but some of us do, that drive and that need to find this information. There seem to be one or two in every family. And I said, but sometimes things just happen. And she said, well, they want to be found. You know that, right? And I said, I never thought of it that way, but that makes sense. And she said, yeah. She said, that's why things happen. And what happened with me was my mom's family in Bari was very well documented. I mean, they have some of the best records from Torito and Acquaviva dell'Elefante. You wouldn't think those two little farming towns would be have those many records out there, but they do. And so I was finding a lot of stuff there, and I was finding uh, some things from Dad's mom. Uh, Piromalo, I was stuck. So I said, well, I'm going to hire somebody to help me confirm what I think about Piromalo. And Sorrentino, I was at a dead end. I knew my great grandfather's name had to be Achille because that was my uncle's name. Couldn't find any records for him at all. Nothing. So I hired somebody over there to do some research for me. He came back with a bunch of records on Piromalo, Quacciolo, all of that stuff. And I didn't hear anything. And I originally hired him to find this Sorrentino. And about a year went by, I didn't have anything. I was just about to contact him again and say, if you can't find anything, just let me know and we'll forget about it. My cousin Louise passed away She had lived with my grandparents, my Sorrentino grandparents. She passed away. 2 days later, I got about 30 records from my researcher in Italy on the Sorrentino family. So, coincidence?
What a blessing. Yeah, I don't believe in coincidences. Obviously, I work for FamilySearch, and FamilySearch is a nonprofit subsidiary of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we believe in the eternal nature of families and that we will see our loved ones again. So, yeah, I think it's a very spiritual, serendipitous work, whatever the term is that you want to use. And the more you dig into it, and the closer you get to these ancestors, doors will open for you. And I think you'll have very sacred experiences. The last experience I'll share, kind of on this segment for you, is this Rosie Garone I told you about. She was known as Rosie Bernard to me up into this time. And this wasn't too long ago. I felt Rosie's influence in my life, that Rosie wanted to be found. And I tried everything from calling the church in Hoboken, just everything that researchers told me to do. I'm not a professional researcher, by the way. I've just spent a lot of time searching my Italian roots, so I'm dangerous with Italian research, because of how much I've done. But I just kept feeling Rosie's influence in my life. She just wanted to be, the record straight, wanted to be found. And I finally just said out loud, I just said, Rosie, I would love to find you, Grandma, but I have done everything that I can do. So you start opening some doors for me and show me what to do, and I'll walk through those doors. And and I said, as a matter of fact, I'm going to a Jewish genealogy conference in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, in about 2 or 3 weeks. Why don't you connect me with someone while I'm there on the East Coast with that can help me find your records so I can learn a little more about you? And so I kind of put it on my ancestors' shoulders in a kind of a non-verbal or proverbial way. So here I'm at this conference 2 weeks later, and I'm standing in the FamilySearch booth, and I'm talking to this rabbi, a rabbinical rabbi, and a woman in the booth next to me kind of drew my attention. And I look over at her name card, and I noticed that she was the assistant state archivist for the state of New Jersey. That's where Rosie was from, right? So I had to excuse myself from my conversation with this rabbi as this lady came to our booth, and I said, "Can I just bug you for a minute?" I said, and I told her my situation with my grandmother. So she was kind of in a hurry, kind of brushed me off. She goes, "Write down the information that you know on a business card and give it to me." So I did really, really quick, got all excited about it. But I thought, she was kind of so dismissive to me and so much in a hurry. I said, I am never going to hear from this woman again. But the next morning, I was preparing to do a presentation in one of the halls there, sessions, and this woman approaches me at the front of the room while I'm getting set up with my laptop, and she hands me this pink envelope. And I said, "What is this?" Again, she just brushes me off with her hand and says, "Don't worry about it." He says, "Do your presentation. After your presentation, take a look at it." I could hardly remember my presentation. I was so excited to look at that envelope, but I didn't, and I waited. When I got done with the presentation, fielding questions, what have you, I opened up that envelope. And here in this envelope was the marriage certificate of Rosie. And it wasn't Rosie Bernardo, it was Rosie Garone, and it mentioned her parents, Michael Garone, and her mother was Maria Bessolano. And just, you just have this emotion that comes over you, and I could feel the gratitude of Rosie that she had been found, and we knew who she was and could continue the research on those lines. So stuff like that happens. So I guess the moral of the story for me on this part for people is, hey, put your family history online. Start doing it. Gather what you can, source it as best you can, and put it online where it can be discovered. And, next generations, current generations of Italians are far more web enabled than previous generations. And the chances of you hooking up with your ancestors and making connections that way are getting better and better and higher and higher. And the next thing is become familiar with the question marks in your family tree. And if you're a person of faith, start applying some faith. um, as you're focusing on those. And I would say that doors are going to open for you the way doors have opened for me, and in very amazing, miraculous ways. And you just can't explain how those things happen. Uh, yeah, they want to be found. They want to be connected. They want to be remembered. And miracles will happen if you apply that faith.
Yeah, and I've heard so many stories about that. Uh, just one real other quick one. I was doing an interview with somebody, and very small town in northern Italy. She didn't know anything about it. Um, she put it out there on Facebook, and somebody responded and said, "I know the town. I live near there, and if you come to Italy, I'll help you out." She wasn't a professional. She is now. She became a professional because of this. Uh, and as the person was looking for a place to live or a place to stay, she she said, I went through 100 places. I was looking for a B&B. I narrowed it down to, 2 places. I did eeny, meeny, miny, right? And I picked one, and she was talking to them about booking, and they said, "Why are you coming here? This is like, the middle of nowhere." And she said, "Well, my grandmother was from there. My great grandmother's from there, and this is the name. And I don't know anything about her except, she didn't have any children and all of that." And the woman on the phone said, "Wait, let me go get my mother." As it turned out, that the people that her great grandmother had no children. She left the land where these people lived and had this B&B to a cousin or something like that, or a friend. I don't remember which one it was. So just by just fate, she was staying in a home that was once owned by her great grandmother.
Wow, what a wonderful story.
Isn't that wild? Isn't that
Yeah,
crazy?
yeah, it really is. Yeah, you just do it. For your listeners, don't give up and go back and walk where they've walked. It changes you. It's I've yeah, I've been able to actually find in the old part of Cagnano Varano, where my dad's family's from. There's a little. They still own all the property, by the way, that the family has farmed for hundreds of
Oh,
years.
cool. That's nice.
So they make the olive oil and they make cheeses for the local area. And I will confess that I have risked during the past years bringing in contraband cheese from the family into the country. True Italian that I am, right? Um, it's just fun, Bob. You never get tired of these stories. Oh, the other fun thing is the recipes, right? When you're back there, you realize how some of these recipes, even though we've immigrated, have carried on through the family today, and how much of what we do today actually was what they are still doing in the old country. So that's cool. Every time you make Italian eggs or a homemade pasta or ragu or some kind of a treat, and you realize when you've been back and you've met with the family and see them doing the same thing, you're like, ah, just renews those connections over and over again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and have a great day out there in Utah, and we'll talk again soon.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Bob. Always fun to talk about family history and, of course, things Italian. So take care. I'd even